what happens when you create a super popular franchise, get rid of the development team, install a new one, and remake the first game for the Super Nintendo, while you get the hugely popular and incredibly difficult Super Castlevania 4, and we're gonna play it until we win. Yeah, you heard me right. Super Castlevania 4 is actually supposed to be a remake of the original Castlevania game, and Konami did one hell of a job. All the staples of Castlevania are back. The hearts, items, tough-as-nail platforming, pain-in-the-ass cheap shots, crazy hard bosses, and Simon's vampire killer. There are a lot of great things to say about this game, but I'll keep it brief. The graphics are awesome, the music is amazing, the level design is fantastic, and the controls are the best amongst any Castlevania game to date. Now the stages themselves are really linear, and there's only a few difficult spots on each stage, so you don't need me telling you what to do because you could probably figure it out on your own. The thing is, you're going to need to have great reflexes in order to get through some of these platforming elements. Yeah, you're going to die a lot. Alright, let's stop burning through our continues. I'm going to show you my tips for getting through Super Castlevania 4. Like every difficult platformer before you, be patient. Rushing into a situation 9 times out of 10 will get you killed. Unless the floor is falling apart behind you, take a second to assess the situation and proceed carefully. Otherwise, you'll make a dumb mistake and jump into the abyss. Get as many hearts as you can. Since this is an early Castlevania game, it goes without saying that your items are invaluable, especially in the later levels. Stock up on hearts and only use your items when you absolutely have to. Keep in mind that the old knockback trick is back in this game. Getting hit will send you sailing in the opposite direction that you're facing, unless you're on the stairs. Speaking of the stairs, you can jump on and off of them now, although you can only jump down from the stairs and not up. This comes in handy, especially if you're surrounded by enemies. Even though you can jump onto stairs, if you get knocked back by an enemy, you're still going to fall through the stairs, so don't rely on them as a safety net. One of the more useful features of this game, you can finally whip diagonally, up, and below you. To whip diagonally or up, just press the D-pad in that direction, and to whip down, just press down while jumping and then attack. Some of the bosses have a weakness to certain items. The only problem is that you generally don't find these items in the level you're going through, so unless you've planned ahead, chances are you're going to stick with beating the bosses to death with your whip. Speaking of items, they're essentially the same loadout as you had in Castlevania 1, but they're nonetheless essential. The dagger costs 1 heart and fires in a straight line, then disappears once it hits something. It does minimal damage but comes in handy in a room full of floating Medusa heads. The stopwatch costs 5 hearts and stops the enemies on screen for about 4 seconds. It's pretty useful, if you can find the damn thing. The axe costs 1 heart and throws an axe in an upward arc away from you. It's slow to fire, but does more damage than the dagger. The holy water costs 1 heart and might be the most useless item in the game. You throw it to the ground and it shatters into a small fireball. It would be useful if it did any real damage, but in Super Castlevania 4, it really doesn't hit for much. The cross costs 1 heart and is an essential item for beating Dracula. It fires out in a straight line, then acts like a boomerang and comes back, potentially hitting your enemies twice. Now, aside from the weapons, there are a ton of other items that play an important role in Simon Belmont's life. The small heart is worth 1 heart point, and the large heart is worth 5. The necklace destroys all of the enemies on screen instantly. The jug makes you invincible for a short period of time. The Morning Star upgrades your whip. At first you start out with the leather one. With 1 upgrade you get the flail, and with the 2nd upgrade you get Simon's vampire killer, which is just a longer flail. I just think declaring it to be the vampire killer sounds a hell of a lot cooler than long flail. The money bag gives you anywhere from 100 to 700 points. The more points you collect, the more lives you get. The double shot, which looks like the Roman numeral 2, lets you use your throwing weapon 2 times in a row. The triple shot, which looks like the Roman numeral 3, lets you use your throwing weapon 3 times in a row. The pork chops, they look more like chicken legs, but whatever, restore some health. The small pork chop restores 5 points, while the larger one restores 10 points of health. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Super Castlevania 4 actually has a hard mode. Yeah, How do you get to it? Well, you gotta beat the game. After the credits are done rolling and you see presented by Konami on screen, just press start and you'll enter hard mode. What's the difference between the two? Well, not a whole lot. In fact, it's only the first few stages that are affected, and even then, it's just more enemies are on screen. Some of the enemies do take more hits, but the platforming, the level layouts, and the bosses, they're all virtually identical. So I'm only going to go over the game once. Level 1. The entrance and stables. There's really not much to say here other than don't get killed. The level is pretty straightforward, and there aren't any really hard platforming spots. The boss, Raudane, is pretty simple. He comes in riding on a horse. Just wail away on the horse's head until he dismounts, which takes about 7 hits, and then attack Raudane until he's dead. He'll jump in the air eventually, just move out of the way so he doesn't land on you. Level 2, the Wilderness. Again, a fairly straightforward level. There's not much here that you need to worry about, just keep going to the right until you reach Medusa. If you only have the whip or you don't have a lot of hearts, the battle against Medusa can be a problem. The general strategy is that you whip Medusa while throwing your item at her. Now she does attack by sending small, nearly unhittable snakes to hit you, while shooting out a purple laser beam that turns you to stone. Now I was really lucky when attacking her because I managed to get behind her, and once you're back there, she can't turn around to use the stone gaze. That's a neat trick, huh? Level 3, the Caves. If you're playing the American version of the game, then you don't really need to worry too much about this level, but the Japanese version threw in a little twist. Instead of having water fall from the ceilings, there's acid falling from them, so watch out. If you get curious, you could find some hidden spots in the caves that have a ton of hearts and power-ups. The bosses, the Orphic Vipers, can be beaten pretty easily. Stand on the top right platform and go to town on him with your whip. Just be careful of the fireballs they like to shoot at you. One head shoots out a 3-way fireball, which can hit you, and the other one shoots out a single flame, which barely does anything. Just don't fall into the water and you should be fine. Level 4, the Rotating Room. In the first part of this level, you'll be faced with some platforms that like to rotate when you jump on them. You can either jump quickly to avoid the platform rotations, or just walk over them to prevent them from spinning. Eventually, you'll reach the first box, Puexil. Whatever. He's a huge skull that spits out tongues. Puxy isn't too difficult, but just keep whipping him until he dies, and try to occasionally avoid the tongues that come after you. Now the next part is tricky the first time through, and you're probably going to die quite a few times, but it's just one of those gimmicky SNES Mode 7 tricks. Basically, when you come up to a gold ring, quickly latch onto it with your whip and hang there. Once the room is finished rotating, you can let go. Except there. Yeah, you see, once you reach that part, just hang tight and wait for a bridge to form underneath you, then you can let go. After that, you'll be in the rotating room, and there's nothing too terrible here, just walk through the room and don't go backwards. The platforms you'll notice are falling down, but they don't fall down until you're a certain distance away from them, so it's nothing to worry about. The next section can be tricky because anytime you have a bunch of platforms threatening to squish you into oblivion, it's tricky. But as long as you have good reflexes, you should be okay. Just be quick about your decisions and you'll reach the level boss. The boss can be difficult. Aside from taking up half the screen, he'll throw bricks at you and a bunch of blocks will drop from the ceiling. Overall, this is the toughest boss you've faced so far. You need to damage Coronat as quickly as possible while avoiding all of the obstacles on screen. Level 5, the Castle Gates, is extraordinarily easy. All you have to do is keep going to the right and eventually the stage will end. The only problem here is that you're on a very tight time limit, so you can't stop to mess around with the other enemies or to try and find secret hidden little gems. You really have to keep moving. Thankfully, there's no boss here because, hey, by the time you get to the end of the stage, you'll be almost out of time anyway. Level 6, the Marble Gallery and Dining Hall. Yeah, another pretty straightforward level, but in the second part, you'll find a nice platforming situation. Okay, so here's how you get by. The white parts of the platforms you can stand on, everything else is unusable. Wait for the chandelier to swing towards you, then jump on the platform. If you wait for the chandelier to swing away from you, you're just gonna miss the jump. After that, you're not gonna run into many other problems, other than the boss. The strategy here is a bit different. When the dancing ghosts first appear, whip them a couple of times, then immediately get to the upper left platform and jump over the ghosts. Whip them a couple of times, then get to the upper right platform. Keep dancing like this for a while, and eventually they'll attack you with either arrows or swords. If they use arrows, just attack them like crazy, because those arrows are nearly impossible to avoid. If they use swords, jump over them and attack them on the backside. Repeat until the dead ghosts are, dead. Level 7, the library and basement. There isn't much to talk about here. The platforming continues to get more and more difficult, and there will be a plethora of enemies to kill in this stage. Take your time, and the jumps won't be nearly as difficult as you think they are. The boss, Sir Grackle, is pretty easy. Just stand on the left edge and whip him until he dies. You'll have to avoid his axe, which can take out a rather large chunk of your health, but he takes a lot of damage from your whip and moves slowly. Just don't stop whipping him and he'll go down. Level 8, the Catacombs. Spiders, spike traps, and Medusa heads. That's never a good combination in a Castlevania game. There are 3 really hard parts in this section. The first one comes when you start to run across a bridge and it falls apart. If you stop or get hit by any enemies, you're as good as dead. Plus there are bats that like to swoop in and try to kill you. If you keep moving to the right, you should be fine. Just don't slow down or stop for any reason. The second part comes when you need to avoid a bunch of spikes jutting out from the ceiling. You've got 2 options, either kneel walk or walk and wait. The pattern isn't difficult to recognize. The space beyond the spikes shooting from the wall will always be safe to walk under. Finally, there's the disappearing, reappearing blocks. This part isn't as difficult as you'd imagine. If you keep jumping to the next visible platform and keep moving to the right, you should never end up falling into the abyss. The boss, Frankenstein's monster, is simple if you know how to beat him. If you keep whipping him and his potions, he'll never move, and you can burn through him in a few seconds. However, if you're like me and you don't read FAQs before you play, beating him is only a matter of knowing what his potions do. The first one explodes and sends flames across the floor, and the second one creates a clone. Jump over the flames and kill the clone in 2 hits. Finally, keep hitting the monster until he's dead. Level 9, the Treasure Room. This level doesn't have nearly as many instant death traps as Level 8 did, but it does have a lot of enemies that will drain your health quickly if you're not careful. The bats in this stage do more damage, and the bone-throwing skeletons will do a lot more damage than you expect, so take your time and be careful about getting hit. The only really difficult part of this level is the boss, Zaphbat. The bat isn't really weak against anything, so you're gonna have to use your whip a lot here. In his large form, he'll drop jewels constantly, but they can be safely ignored. What can't be ignored are the larger jewels that he shoots off after you hit him, so stand under him and whip him until he breaks up into 4 smaller Zaphbats. In the smaller form, they're a bit more difficult because you can't stand under them. If you have the cross, then you'll be able to breeze through this without a problem. Otherwise, be careful when you hit the bats. You'll take damage from the jewels they shoot out. Level 10, the Clock Tower. Ooh. Mention the Clock Tower to any Castlevania player and they will fall on the floor crying in the fetal position. It's never a good sign when you get up to the Clock Tower. Thankfully, this level isn't too bad. Well, there are a couple of sticking points, especially when you need to ascend to the top of the tower by hanging on a gold ring with your whip. Just take your time and be cautious of what's above you and you should be okay. Remember to always look at what's above you before you head to another platform, or you may end up standing on a crumbling platform with an enemy stopping you from jumping across a gap. Akmodin II is the boss, and he can be pretty easy. If you have the holy water, you can kill him quickly, otherwise just run around the stage and attack him with your whip, and you should eventually win. The guy's not that difficult. Level B, the lair of the three fiends and Dracula's keep. This one is evil. Let's start off with the bridge. It'll fall apart and transform into a bunch of bats as you cross. Just keep moving to the right and you'll be fine. Right after that, however, comes the single most diabolical level I've ever played before. You've got to climb up to the top of the stage with a spinning spiked wheel of instant death chasing you. Once you manage to get past the first section, then you've got to ascend the tower by jumping across flying platforms, all the while moving to the left to avoid getting crushed by the instant death spikes. And you've got to do this twice. The second time, you've really got to move quickly to the left, otherwise you'll be instantly crushed. After that mess of death, you'll face Slogro, the first of the three fiends. He's got two phases. In the first phase, when you hit him, he'll fly into the air and try to land on you. After he lands, he stabs outward with a spear and shoots a fireball. Just duck under it and hit him again. Repeat until the spear shatters. His second phase is a bit more difficult to deal with. He'll still fly into the air when you hit him, but he comes down much more quickly this time. Your best option is to jump on the platform opposite the side Slogger lands and hit him from afar. In his second phase, he'll try to run at you with his beak. Just jump over him to avoid the attack, hit him with the whip, and repeat until he's dead. After you beat Slogra, you'll climb a few stairs and face Gotham, and he's significantly easier. His attacks are basically limited to swooping in at you and throwing fireballs. Both attacks can be avoided very easily. Stand under him and wail away with your whip. The last fiend is Death, and by God, he's a hard son of a bitch. Yeah, he throws those mini scythes at you, but now he'll stand at the far right edge of the screen, pulling you close to him, and he throws out this huge scythe. When he does this, keep moving to the left to avoid being sucked into Death, and jump over the big scythe when it comes close to you. Once you're out of danger, whip Death until he's history. Whip Death until he's dead. That's one of the greatest ironies of Castlevania, don't you think? After you beat Death, you'll come up to Dracula's Keep, but before you climb the stairs, take advantage of the secret resupply in the lower left corner of the keep. Then head over to Dracula himself. Dracula's first phase is relatively easy. Throw your cross at his head and attack the purple fireballs he shoots out to avoid taking damage. His second phase occurs at about 7 points of damage. He'll spawn 2 fireballs that follow you around the screen and cause 2 pillars of flame to appear under you. Attack Dracula with your cross while you use your whip to take out the sentient flames. In his final phase, he'll continue to warp around the room, but instead of shooting fire at you, he'll summon lightning down to do some serious kick-ass damage. Stick to one portion of the screen and you'll be able to avoid the lightning while you use your last bit of hearts to throw your cross at Dracula. Nice ending, huh? Well, Super Castlevania 4 really isn't the hardest or the best game on the Super Nintendo, but it is memorable for being one of the best remakes of a game ever released on the SNES. Well, that's Super Castlevania 4 in a nutshell, folks. You have a safe and happy Halloween.